Hello, BookTube. Sorry for the whining and buzzing that you might hear in the background. The grounds crews here on. It's a Saturday. It's a beautiful day, clear and crisp. Not a cloud in the sky. No humidity whatsoever. No leftover heat. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous summer day. And so they're here to clean up and trim and whatnot. And that's just as well because what the front steps here to Hyde Cottage are bracketed by two bushes. And if you are coming up your front steps and you have to do this, then it's probably time for them to be pruned. Not that I would mind one way or another. But I recently just a minute ago, did the page 112 tag with 3 debut works of fiction, 3 things that I'll be reading this weekend, or rereading this weekend. And it occurred to me that that's only half the coin, right? The other side of the coin is nonfiction. I read an enormous amount of nonfiction, and I'll be reading quite a bit of nonfiction this weekend. So I thought I'll do a page 112 tag for nonfiction as well, with the premise behind the page 112 tag being that you skip the well-polished beginning of a book and you go to page 112 just at random, and you read that page to get a sense of what the whole book is like, keeping in mind, of course, that carries its own dangers, because books are cumulative things. The good ones are, the ones that know what they're doing, are cumulative things. So, of course, if you judge them by any one single page, you'll be doing them a disservice. But it's a fun thing. It's a fun way to get a kind of a sort of first impression and then go from there. So this will be 3 more books that I'll be reading this weekend, only these are all nonfiction. And we'll see what we make of their page 112 excerpts. So this is number 1. While awaiting the Major's arrival, one Sam Adams dismounted at the campsite with word that Secretary of War Edwin Stanton had officially sanctioned him to take Powell's place. The startled explorers examined official-looking papers, then shrugged and gave him a place at their mess. On May 11th, Powell steamed up on the Union Pacific, leading his brother Walter and a young unnamed greenhorn recruit, along with 4 specially crafted wooden rowboats. Taking one look at Adams and his letters, Powell politely asked Adams to leave, which he immediately did. A liar of gargantuan proportions, Adam would later turn up in Washington with a request for funds, backed by the bald-faced assertion that he, not Powell, had descended the Colorado, and came close to getting what he asked. Much to his irritation, Powell found the waiting expeditioners hungover and crotchety, but he quickly sorted them out, setting them to unload the 3 freight and 1 scout boats from the flat cars and onto the banks of the Green. The rowboats, although sleek and narrow, contained double ribbing, added planking, and bulkheads that increased their durability, but made them quite heavy, as the men would soon find out. Field gave them permission to camp on a willow-choked islet about a mile below the railroad bridge, just out of the view of curious townspeople. Powell next turned the men to caulking and painting the boats, and preparing the 7,000 pounds of food and supplies for transit. The young recruit whom Powell had brought along soon left, scared off by the practical joking of the rough fellows whom he'd had planned on joining. This left Powell with 7 men besides himself, not enough to crew 4 heavily laden boats, each of which ideally required 2 oarsmen. Okay, so that's excerpt number 1. It's very, very good. It's the little anecdote about the grifter named Sam Adams is tossed in there. It's only 1 paragraph. Very colorful. Breaks up the monotony of just narrating the camp life, and is done with concision. I liked it quite a bit. The whole thing is done with concision, so that you can feel the rhythm of what's going on there, and a little bit of the character of the character named Powell. We'll get to that later. So that was a good, solid outing. Now we'll do excerpt number 2. In an Orwellian move, Sinclair has even forced local news anchors to read a scripted message about false news that echoes President Trump's own rhetoric undermining real reporting. Many of these outlets don't even go through the motions of trying to provide verifiable facts and information, but instead attempt to spin what one talk show host calls truth-based content into self-serving, pre-cooked narratives that ratify audiences' existing beliefs or gin up their worst fears. In recent years, the conservative talk show host Charlie Sykes observed, conservative media created an alternative reality bubble that destroyed their own immunity to fake news while empowering the worst and most reckless on the right. A 2017 Harvard study of more than 1.25 million stories published online between April 2015 and November 2016 concluded that pro-Trump audiences relied heavily on this insulated knowledge community, which uses social media as a backbone to transmit a hyper-partisan perspective to the world, and reinforces users' shared worldview while poisoning them against mainstream journalism that might challenge their preconceptions. The result? An environment in which the president can allude to a terrorist event in Sweden that never happened, or a presidential advisor can reference a non-existent Bowling Green massacre. Okay, so once again, straightforward, to the point, very unadorned prose. In nonfiction, page 112 tags, this is going to be especially evident that in nonfiction, unlike with fiction, there isn't the presumption on the reader's part that you're going to need a narrative punch every short segment. The idea of that narrative punch constantly happening isn't there. With nonfiction, one of the reasons people who don't read much of it are leery of it is because it requires long-form attention. It's not going to deliver punches like that. So this is obviously sort of integumentary tissue. It's meant to move forward, although it has a nice momentum. And then now we'll do the third one for our nonfiction, page 112 tag. So let's see here. Sometimes transparency is impossible. No one knows how some machine learning algorithms work, including their designers. The algorithms are fundamentally incomprehensible to humans. Think of them as black boxes. Data goes in, decisions come out, and what happens in between remains something of a mystery. Even if an algorithm can't be made public, or if there is no way to understand how it works, we can demand explainability. That is, we can demand that algorithms explain their reasoning. So, for example, when an algorithm makes a medical diagnosis or scores a job candidate for suitability, it can also be required to provide reasons for its decisions. This isn't a panacea. Because of the way machine learning works, explanations might not be possible or understandable by humans, and requiring them often reduces the accuracy of the underlying algorithms because it forces them to be simpler than they would be otherwise. So maybe what we really want is accountability or contestability. Perhaps we need the ability to inspect an algorithm or to interrogate it with sample data and examine the results. Maybe all we need is auditability. If nothing else, we can treat algorithms like humans. Humans are terrible at explaining their reasoning, and their decisions are filled with unconscious biases. Too often, an explanation, a logical series of steps taken to reach a decision, is really nothing more than a justification. Our subconscious brains make the decision, and the conscious brain justifies it with an explanation. The psychological literature is filled with studies that demonstrate this. Still, we are able to judge human biases by looking at their decisions. Similarly, we can judge algorithms by looking at their outputs. After all, what we want to know is if an algorithm used to score job candidates is sexist, or an algorithm used to make parole decisions is racist. And we might decide that for some applications, machine learning algorithms are simply not appropriate because we want more control over how a decision is made. I don't have any concrete recommendations for how we can secure our algorithms because all of this is too new. We are just getting started figuring out what is possible and feasible. Right now, our goals should be as much transparency, explainability, and audibility as possible. Very, very good. Very, very good. As clear and concise as the other two, but with a lot more information distilled a lot clearer. There's a much greater sense of headlong momentum in this third than in either of the first two. When it comes to these three nonfiction page 112s, the third one would get my vote. Probably followed by the first one, and then number two. But number two, I think, I hesitate to put number two last because number two, about fake news bubbles, very much struck me as the middle of something, as a portion of a building argument. So I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. But I'm curious to know what you thought. What did you think of these three? Where would you rank them? I myself think the clear winner is number three. But anyway, here's what we have. The first one, about Powell and the Grand Canyon, is about John Wesley Powell. And it's this. It's The Promise of the Grand Canyon by John Ross. This is John Wesley Powell's perilous journey and his vision for the American West. With a fantastic cover, just the churning green water. And this is all about John Wesley Powell and the warnings that he made a century ago about the delicacy of the American West's ecosystem. John Wesley Powell's first descent into the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in 1869 counts among the most dramatic chapters in the history of American exploration. When the canyon spit out the surviving members of his expedition, they were starving, battered, and nearly naked. Accomplishing what others thought impossible, they completed a journey that Lewis and Clark had begun almost 70 years before, the final exploration of continental America. And I read a chunk of this in an advance copy, and then it just fell by the wayside. I got caught up in other things, but I really liked the chunk that I read. I didn't get as far as page 112, so I'll be reading this weekend. I can't wait. Then the second one, the one about fake news bubbles, is this: The Death of Truth by Michiko Kakutani. She was the most powerful and most read book critic in the Western world for decades. The main book critic for the New York Times, and she's written a book about, the subtitle is Notes on Falsehood in the Age of Trump. We live in a time when the very idea of objective truth is mocked and discounted by the occupant of the White House. Discredited conspiracy theories and ideologies have resurfaced, proven science is once more held up for debate, and Russian propaganda floods our screens. The wisdom of the crowd has usurped research and expertise, and we are each left clinging to the beliefs that confirm our biases. How did truth become an endangered species in contemporary America? And the idea I get, the feeling I get of this book is that it's something of a white-hot, extended polemic. And if it's something like that, something the author sat down, assembled a bare agenda of facts, and then just ripped through, then it's doubly unfair to judge one page. The one page we've read here is the author, I think, just working up to something bigger. I'll find out, because I'll be reading this today. And then the third one, the one that I like the most, something we've seen on this channel before. This is by Bruce Schneier, and it is Click Here to Kill Everybody: Security and Survival in a Hyper-Connected World. From driverless cars to smart thermostats, from autonomous stock trading systems to drones equipped with their own behavioral algorithms, the internet now has direct effects on the physical world. While this computerized future, often called the Internet of Things, carries enormous potential, best-selling author Bruce Schneier argues the catastrophe awaiting in its new vulnerabilities and dangers. Forget data theft. Cutting-edge digital attackers can now literally crash your car, pacemaker, and home security system, as well as everyone else's. And I got the impression, just from the chunk of this that I read, that it was going to be just a blockbuster of revelations on every page. And the excerpt that I read did not dispel that impression. So there you go. So this is a nonfiction page 112 tag, and the two of them together, the fiction and the nonfiction page 112 tags, if you add them together, they are also a good chunk of my Saturday reads, because I'll be reading quite a bit today. Where is it here? The Andrew Martin is a reread, so it will not take any time at all. The Neil Patel book is very thin, and as you could tell from the excerpt that I did in the other video, it's not all that taxing. And the Kakutani book is tiny. Not only is it short, but it's a smaller book. You can tell here. It's a smaller book. It's really an extended pamphlet. So I'll be doing all of these things in very short order. And I'm looking forward to your own impressions of what you read, of what I'll be reading. And I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.